Today, Abraham Lincoln is remembered as the president who took bold steps to end slavery and ensure freedom for all enslaved individuals in America. While the Emancipation Proclamation was a right and just action, the truth behind it is far more complex and frankly shocking. Lincoln didn't free enslaved African Americans because he believed they deserved to be free or that they were equal to whites. In fact, Lincoln didn't free them out of any deep belief in black freedom. The unsettling revelations in this video highlight the fact that history sometimes fails to reveal the entire truth. Did Abraham Lincoln truly care about black people, or were they simply tools to an end? Were they just pawns in his fight to preserve the Union, preventing the United States from disintegrating? Lincoln's actions are not as simple as they first appear, and the story behind his views on slavery and race may change the way we see him. Starting in the early 1850s, a harsh reality began to emerge. While Lincoln was strongly opposed to slavery, his opposition wasn't necessarily grounded in a belief in racial equality. One of the clearest examples of this contradiction is his proposal to send freed African Americans to Liberia. Instead of integrating freed African Americans as equals into American society, Lincoln proposed that they be removed entirely. This plan directly conflicts with the core principles of equality and justice, reflecting Lincoln's inability to fully recognize African Americans as equal citizens within the United States. On the night of December 31, 1862, just a day before issuing the final Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln signed a contract with Bernard Company, a Florida cotton planter and entrepreneur. This contract was an agreement to use federal funds to relocate 5,000 formerly enslaved people from the United States to El Lash Cow Island, a small 20-square-mile island off the southwestern coast of Haiti. Since the early 1850s, Lincoln had been pushing colonization as a remedy for the gradual emancipation of the nation's enslaved population. While he was fervently opposed to slavery, he didn't believe in racial equality or in the possibility of successful integration of black people into white American society, either North or South. As such, the idea of unleashing nearly 4 million black people into that society was a political non-starter. Despite the fact that most black Americans in the 1850s had been born on U.S. soil, Lincoln advocated for shipping them to Central America, the Caribbean, or even back to Africa. If, as the friends of colonization hope, we succeed in freeing our land from the dangerous presence of slavery and at the same time in restoring a captive people to their long-lost fatherland, Lincoln said during his eulogy for statesman Henry Clay in 1852, "It will indeed be a glorious consummation." In 1862, just before signing the contract with Bernard Company, Lincoln had proposed a constitutional amendment that would have allowed for the colonization of African Americans outside the United States. This amendment would have included federal compensation for slave owners who lost their human property due to emancipation. As part of his plan, Lincoln considered several options for relocation, ultimately settling on Cox's El Lash proposal after considering a colonization plan that would have sent freed black Americans to the Cherokee province of Panama. Cox's plan envisioned former slaves working on a cotton plantation. Under this arrangement, each family would be provided with homes, access to hospitals, and schools. The idea was to create a structured environment where freed African Americans could transition from slavery to a form of independence. At the end of their 4-year work contracts, these families were promised 16 acres of land along with the wages they had earned during the contract period. On paper, this plan presented an image of fairness and opportunity. However, the reality of such schemes was far more complicated, reflecting the deep racial inequalities and paternalistic attitudes that underpinned much of the post-emancipation period. This plan was described as voluntary, but in truth it was heavily encouraged by President Lincoln himself. To understand why Lincoln supported such an initiative, it's crucial to explore the broader context of the time, including the contentious debates about how to integrate millions of newly freed African Americans into a society that had systematically oppressed them for centuries. The concept of colonization as a solution to the problem of freed slaves was not unique to Lincoln or Cox. It had deep roots in American history, stretching back to the early 19th century. The American Colonization Society, ACS, founded in 1816, was one of the earliest organizations to promote the idea of relocating freed African Americans to Africa, specifically to Liberia, a colony established for this purpose. Supporters of colonization range from abolitionists who viewed it as a way to ensure freedom for African Americans without exposing them to the hostility of white society, to overt racists who wanted to remove black people from the United States entirely. Lincoln's endorsement of colonization must be viewed through this lens. His belief in the fundamental incompatibility of black and white Americans living together peacefully was shaped by the deeply entrenched prejudices of his time. Even as he worked to abolish slavery, Lincoln struggled to envision a multiracial democracy where African Americans could enjoy equal rights. Colonization, in his mind, offered a compromise, a way to grant freedom while avoiding the societal upheaval he feared would come with full integration. Cox's plan promised an organized and supportive transition for freed African Americans, addressing basic needs such as housing, education, and health care. These promises were undoubtedly appealing, especially to those who had known nothing but the deprivation and brutality of slavery. However, these assurances masked deeper issues. The notion of providing land and wages, for example, was not as straightforward as it seemed. Many former slaves were skeptical of such promises, given the long history of exploitation and broken agreements by white authorities. Lincoln, for his part, remained steadfast in his colonization agenda, believing it to be a viable solution to what he saw as an irreconcilable racial divide. His views on the matter were not based on notions of equality or justice, but were rooted in the belief that coexistence between black and white Americans would inevitably lead to social and political conflict. This perspective guided many of his policies, including his support for relocating freed African Americans to colonies outside the United States. One of the most infamous examples of this effort was the failed colonization attempt on Ile Avache, a small island off the coast of Haiti. Lincoln's administration saw this venture as an opportunity to address the challenges of integrating freed slaves into American society by removing them entirely from the country. The settlers, primarily freed African Americans seeking a better life, were lured by promises of fertile land, stable communities, and the opportunity to live free from racial oppression. Yet upon their arrival, the settlers found a grim reality waiting for them. The promised land was far from hospitable. It lacked adequate resources, infrastructure, or preparation to support a thriving community. The conditions were dire. Many settlers struggled to find shelter, food was scarce, and diseases quickly swept through the population. The dream of a new beginning turned into a nightmare as the colonists faced immense suffering and the project ultimately collapsed. This failure was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of poorly executed colonization efforts championed by Lincoln and his administration. These projects not only reflected the deep racial prejudices of the era, but also highlighted the lack of genuine commitment to ensuring true freedom and equality for African Americans. Back in the United States, the promise of freedom was similarly fraught with challenges. For many freed slaves, emancipation did not bring the opportunities they had hoped for. The societal structures that had upheld slavery for centuries did not disappear overnight. Instead, they evolved into new systems of oppression, such as sharecropping, black codes, and later Jim Crow laws. These mechanisms effectively kept African Americans in a state of economic and social subjugation, perpetuating the inequalities that emancipation was supposed to eradicate. Lincoln's personal views on race further complicate his legacy. While he is often celebrated as the Great Emancipator, his own writings and speeches reveal a more complex and at times troubling perspective. In debates and public addresses, Lincoln frequently expressed his belief in white superiority, stating that he did not advocate for the social or political equality of black and white Americans. This sentiment underpinned many of his policies and decisions, including his cautious approach to emancipation. The Emancipation Proclamation itself is a prime example of this cautious pragmatism. Far from being a sweeping declaration of freedom, it was a carefully calculated wartime measure designed to weaken the Confederacy. The proclamation only applied to states in rebellion, leaving slavery untouched in border states that remained loyal to the Union. For many African Americans, this limited scope raised questions about Lincoln's true intentions and commitment to their freedom. Moreover, Lincoln's primary goal throughout the Civil War was not to end slavery but to preserve the Union. In his famous letter to Horace Greeley, Lincoln wrote, "If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that." This statement underscores the extent to which emancipation was a means to an end rather than an end in itself. Despite these complexities, Lincoln's actions did have a profound impact on the course of American history. The Emancipation Proclamation paved the way for the 13th Amendment, which ultimately abolished slavery in the United States. While the amendment marked a significant step forward, it was not a panacea for the deep-rooted racial inequalities that continued to plague the nation. The post-war Reconstruction era presented its own set of challenges. Freed African Americans faced immense obstacles as they sought to build new lives for themselves and their families. Many hoped for the promise of 40 acres and a mule, a phrase that symbolized the possibility of land ownership and economic independence. However, this promise was rarely fulfilled, leaving most freed men and women with little choice but to work as sharecroppers or laborers under exploitative conditions. Reconstruction also saw the rise of violent resistance to black advancement, particularly in the South. White supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan emerged, using terror and intimidation to undermine African American progress and suppress their rights. These efforts were compounded by the federal government's eventual retreat from Reconstruction policies, which left African Americans vulnerable to systemic discrimination and violence. Lincoln's assassination in 1865 added another layer of complexity to his legacy. With his death, the nation lost a leader whose vision, flawed as it may have been, had set the stage for significant change. His successor, Andrew Johnson, lacked Lincoln's political acumen and was openly hostile to many of the Reconstruction policies aimed at supporting African Americans. As a result, the progress made during Lincoln's presidency was significantly undermined in the years that followed. Today, Abraham Lincoln's legacy remains a subject of intense debate. While he is rightly credited with taking bold steps to end slavery, the motivations and limitations of his actions continue to prompt critical examination. Was he a pragmatic leader navigating the complexities of his time, or did his policies reflect a deeper ambivalence toward the cause of racial equality? The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. For African Americans, Lincoln's legacy is both a source of inspiration and a reminder of the ongoing struggle for justice and equality. His actions, while imperfect, laid the groundwork for future generations to continue the fight for civil rights. Yet they also serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of settling for symbolic gestures over substantive change. In reflecting on Lincoln's presidency, it is essential to consider the broader historical context and the systemic forces at play. His story is not just about one man's choices, but about the evolving dynamics of power, race, and freedom in America. By grappling with these complexities, we can gain a deeper understanding of our shared history and the challenges that remain in the pursuit of a more just and equitable society. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this untold side of history. Share your opinions in the comments below. Be sure to explore more compelling stories by selecting one of the videos displayed on your screen.